Dr. Minji had been awake for 37 hours straight. She knew this because she had checked the time on her wrist device exactly 12 minutes ago, and her mind was still sharp enough to do the math. Or at least, she thought it was sharp. It was hard to tell anymore. Everything felt soft and fuzzy around the edges, like she was looking at the world through a thick piece of glass. She stood at the front of the teaching chamber on Station Harmony, trying very hard to focus on what she was saying. The words were coming out of her mouth, but she was not entirely sure they made sense. She was talking about quantum entanglement, a topic she had explained 100 times before. She knew it well. She knew it so well that she could probably explain it even while sleeping. That thought made her smile a little. And it was a dangerous thought because it made her think about sleeping. And thinking about sleeping made her very tired all at once. The 6 Zelkani cubs sat in front of her, their bodies made of something that looked like clear crystal. They had large eyes, many more than humans did, and those eyes could see things that human eyes could never see. They could see into ultraviolet light and infrared light and probably many other kinds of light that had no names yet. Their skin shimmered with soft colors as they moved, blues and greens and purples that seemed to come from inside their bodies. They were waiting for her to continue her lesson. Minji opened her mouth to speak, but the words would not come. She had lost her place. Where was she? Quantum entanglement. Yes, she had been talking about particles that were connected to each other even when they were far apart. It was beautiful. Really. It was one of her favorite parts of physics because it seemed almost like magic, even though it was perfectly real and perfectly explained by mathematics. She sat down slowly in her chair. Just for a moment, she told herself. Just for a second. Her eyes were very heavy, like someone had placed weights on her eyelids. In the observation chamber above the teaching room, Commander Hay-1 watched everything through the transparent barrier. His scales were a deep blue color, and they changed shade slightly as he moved. He was much larger than the cubs, and his eyes were sharper, colder, more judgmental. He had been watching Dr. Minji for 6 months now, ever since she had arrived at Station Harmony as humanity's first educational ambassador. This was important work. The Zelkani Collective was trying to decide if human beings were ready to be treated as equals in the galactic community. They needed to know if humans were intelligent enough, disciplined enough, reliable enough. Dr. Minji was the test case. Everything she did would be reported back to the Zelkani Council, and her behavior would help determine the future of all humanity. Commander Hay-1 had seen her work hard. He had watched her prepare lessons for many hours, stay late in the teaching chamber after the cubs left, study their biology and their language and their ways of thinking. He had admired her dedication, even if he had not expressed this admiration. The Zelkani were not a species that expressed feelings easily. Feelings were considered a kind of weakness, a distraction from logical thinking. Now he watched as Dr. Minji's head began to tilt forward. Her voice had already become softer and slower. The words were not coming as quickly. This was not a good sign. This was, in fact, the kind of thing that would go into his report, the kind of thing that would damage humanity's chances of acceptance. Minji's eyes closed. Her breathing became deeper and more regular. She had fallen asleep in the middle of teaching, sitting up in her chair, her hands resting on her lap. This had happened twice before in the past 2 weeks, though this time it was worse. This time she had fallen asleep faster. This time, she stayed asleep longer. The first time it happened, Commander Hay-1 had assumed it was a temporary problem, maybe an infection or a reaction to the different air on the space station. The second time, he had begun to wonder if this was a problem with her species in general. Maybe humans were simply not strong enough for advanced work. But now, watching her sleep, he felt something unexpected. He felt something close to concern. It was not a Zelkani emotion. Zelkani did not feel concerned about others. They competed with each other, and they respected strength, and they saw weakness as something that should be eliminated or improved. Concern for another being was not part of their culture, yet he felt it anyway. The cubs did not call for help. They did not alert a supervisor. They simply looked at each other, and their bodies began to glow with soft colors. They were communicating, their bioluminescence creating patterns that only they could understand. They were talking about their teacher, who had fallen asleep in the middle of teaching them about quantum entanglement. Ki-tae, the most intelligent of the cubs, looked at Dr. Minji's sleeping face with something in his many eyes that Commander Haewon could not name. It looked like understanding. It looked like respect. But that was impossible, because human weakness should not earn respect. Minji slept for 40 minutes while the cubs watched over her. They did not make loud noises. They did not move around the chamber in ways that would disturb her. They simply sat quietly and waited for her to wake up. Commander Haewon had his hand near the emergency alert button for all 40 minutes. He never pressed it. He wanted to press it. He wanted to report this incident immediately. It was his duty to report it. But something stopped him. Some small part of him that was not entirely Zelkani. Or perhaps, some very old part of him that the Zelkani had forgotten they even had, wanted to see what would happen next. When Dr. Minji woke up, she looked confused and afraid. She looked like someone who knew she had made a terrible mistake. She looked very small, and very tired, and very far from home. Commander Haewon realized that he had never thought about how far from home she was. Millions of kilometers away from Earth, in a place where nothing was familiar, doing a job that was important and terrifying, working with a species that judged every mistake, that recorded everything, that seemed to have no mercy. He had been given the job of evaluating her. He had been given the power to determine if she was good enough. But as he watched her wake up and looked at the cubs around her, he began to understand that he did not have all the information he needed to make that judgment. There was something happening in this room that he did not yet understand. Something that might be more important than a report about a sleeping teacher. Something that might change everything. Dr. Minji opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The walls around her were smooth and white, and they seemed to glow with a soft light from inside. The air felt different than air on Earth. It was cool and clean, and somehow thinner. Even though she knew the station maintained normal atmospheric pressure. Maybe her tired brain just made everything feel strange. Then she remembered. Station harmony. The teaching chamber. The Zelkani cubs. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. She had fallen asleep. She had actually fallen asleep during class. This was her first and most important job, and she had failed at the most basic requirement, staying awake. But something was different. The cubs were not angry. They were not disappointed or contemptuous. Instead, they were gathered in a circle around one of their group, and they were making sounds. Not the normal communication sounds. These were different. These were more like music. Ki-tae, the young Zelkani with the brightest bioluminescence, saw that Minji was awake. He stepped forward, and the other cubs fell silent. Seo-yun, who was the second most intelligent, came with him. Then Myung, Hee-jun, Jin Park, and little Ara, who was the youngest and smallest of the group. Ki-tae's body glowed with blue light, and he began to speak in the special language that had been created so that humans and Zelkani could communicate. You experienced necessary biological recovery, he said carefully, his voice making sounds that no human vocal cords could make. But the translation device in Minji's ear turned it into Korean words. This is normal for your species. We have continued the lesson while you rested. Minji felt even more shame. They had to continue the lesson by themselves? Without a teacher? What had they done? Had they just sat there doing nothing? Had they become bored and restless? But Ki-tae was already moving to the center of the chamber, and the other cubs joined him. They stood in a circle, and their bodies began to glow with colors. Blues and greens and purples and yellows all danced across their crystalline skin, and then they began to explain quantum entanglement. It was not a simple repetition of what Minji had been saying before she fell asleep. It was something much more beautiful. The cubs had taken the fragmented words and half-formed thoughts that Minji had been expressing, and they had woven them together into something complete and whole. Kite explained the basic idea. Two particles could become connected in such a way that when something happened to one particle, the other particle would respond instantly, no matter how far away it was. Seo Yun added the mathematical explanation, using shapes that appeared in the air made from their bioluminescence. Mayung discussed what this meant for human understanding of how the universe worked. Hei Jun asked questions about the implications, and Jin Park answered those questions using careful logic. Little Ara, who was the youngest and usually the quietest, added an observation about how this was similar to the way the Zelkani themselves were connected through their collective memory. Minji realized that the cubs had not just understood her sleepy, scattered lecture. They had actually learned from it. They had taken the pieces and put them together in a way that made sense. They had thought about it and discussed it among themselves. They had deepened their understanding. But there was something else, something even more remarkable. The way they were doing this was not the way that Zelkani usually learned, or at least not the way Minji had been told they learned. The cubs were not competing with each other for the best answer. They were not trying to prove that their understanding was superior to everyone else's. They were working together. They were sharing ideas and building on each other's thoughts. They were collaborating. This was not supposed to be a Zelkani behavior. Minji had been briefed extensively before she came to Station Harmony. She had learned that the Zelkani were a competitive species. They valued individual achievement above all else. They climbed over each other to reach higher positions. They judged harshly and showed no mercy for weakness. But these cubs, these 6 young Zelkani, were doing something different. They were gentle with each other. They were patient. When one cub made an error, another cub corrected it kindly, not harshly. When one cub had a good idea, the others recognized it and built on it. The cubs were, Minji realized with a shock of understanding, being kind to each other, and they had been kind to her. While she slept, they had not reported her failure to the supervisors. They had not used her weakness against her. They had simply continued the lesson. And in continuing the lesson, they had protected her. Minji felt tears begin to form in her eyes, and she tried to blink them away. She was very tired and very emotional, and she was not sure why this moment was affecting her so deeply. Maybe it was because she had been so worried about this job. Maybe it was because she had been so alone, representing all of humanity, being judged constantly, having to be perfect all the time. Maybe it was because, for the first time since arriving at Station Harmony, someone had chosen to help her instead of exposing her weakness. Kite finished the explanation and looked at Minji with his many eyes. "Do you have questions?" he asked. "Or observations? We would like to know what you think about these conclusions we have reached." Minji took a deep breath. She tried to stop the tears from falling. She tried to sound like a professional teacher, and not like someone who was completely exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed. "Your understanding is excellent," she said quietly. "You have not only learned what I was trying to teach, but you have improved upon it. You have thought about it in ways that I had not yet thought about it, even though I have been studying this subject for many years." The cubs' bioluminescence grew brighter, warmer colors flowing across their skin. They were pleased by this praise. But Minji realized that was not why they had done this work. They had done it because they were curious. They had done it because they wanted to understand. They had done it because it was the right thing to do. In the observation chamber above, Commander Hei-1 was very still. He had been recording everything. He had watched the cubs collaborate and support each other and protect their teacher. He had seen something that he knew was significant, though he was not yet sure exactly what it meant. He was beginning to understand that the evaluation of humanity might be more complicated than he had thought. It might not be about measuring human intelligence or discipline against Zelkani standards. It might be about something else entirely, something that the Zelkani had lost a very long time ago. For the next several hours, Dr. Minji taught with the energy of someone who had been given a second chance. Her exhaustion did not disappear, but it seemed less important somehow. The cubs continued to amaze her with their insights and their willingness to engage deeply with the material. They asked intelligent questions and offered observations that showed they were truly thinking, not just memorizing. By the time the lesson ended, Minji felt more alive than she had in weeks. She had spent so long worried about failing in front of an alien species that might judge humanity based on her performance. But these cubs had shown her that they were not interested in harsh judgment. They were interested in learning, in growing, in understanding. When the cubs finally left the teaching chamber to go to their residential area, Minji sat alone in the quiet room. She looked at the walls and the chairs and the equipment, and she realized that something had shifted inside her. She no longer felt like she was being constantly tested and evaluated. She felt like she was part of something real, something genuine. She felt like she had made friends. The thought surprised her. Could human beings and Zelkani actually become friends? She had always imagined this assignment as a professional interaction, a formal exchange of knowledge. But friendship? That seemed too hopeful, too human. She was so lost in these thoughts that she almost did not notice when Commander Haewon entered the teaching chamber. She only became aware of his presence when his shadow fell across her face. Minji jumped up quickly, suddenly conscious of how exhausted and disheveled she must look. "Commander Haewon." "Come," she said, trying to make her voice sound professional and alert. "I did not know you were coming to observe the lesson." The commander was a large Zelkani, much bigger than the cubs. His scales were a deep blue color that was almost black, and his eyes were sharp and penetrating. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and Minji felt her heart begin to race. Was this a problem? Had she done something wrong? "Sit down, Dr. Minji," he said finally. His voice was lower than the cubs' voices, and it seemed to contain notes that human ears could barely detect. "I would like to speak with you about what happened today." Minji sat down, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She had been found out. Someone had reported her for falling asleep. Now, there would be consequences. Maybe she would be sent back to Earth in shame. Maybe humanity would be judged as unfit for the galactic community based on her failure. "I fell asleep during the lesson," she said quickly, before Commander Haewon could accuse her of it. "I know that was wrong. I know that it showed a lack of discipline and professionalism. I apologize. It will not happen again." Commander Haewon tilted his head slightly, a gesture that might have been curiosity or might have been something else. "Why did you fall asleep?" he asked. "Because I am exhausted," Minji answered honestly. What was the point of lying? "Because I have not been sleeping well since I arrived at Station Harmony. Because I am worried about this job and about representing humanity correctly. Because my body needed rest, more than my mind wanted to stay awake." "Work and see." The commander was silent for a long time. Minji waited, feeling the fear grow in her chest. This was it. This was where everything fell apart. "The cubs did not report your failure," Commander Haewon said finally. "They protected it. They continued the lesson and made sure that their teacher could rest without being discovered and punished. This is unusual behavior for Zelkani." Minji felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was quickly followed by concern. The cubs had protected her? They had risked something by not reporting her? "Are they in trouble?" she asked quickly. "The cubs should not have covered for me. That is not their responsibility. If anyone should be punished, it should be me." Commander Haewon made a sound that might have been laughter, though it did not sound like human laughter. "Minji, you do not understand how unusual what they did was. In Zelkani culture, showing weakness is something that should be reported and recorded. Strength is what we value. Individuals who cannot maintain their responsibilities should be removed. But they are just children," Minji protested. "They should not be punished for showing compassion." "That is the human perspective," Commander Haewon said. "And it is, I think, part of why you are here. We have asked ourselves if humanity is ready to join the greater galactic community. We have wondered if your species has the discipline and intelligence to be our equals. But perhaps the question should have been different. Perhaps we should have asked if humanity could teach us something we have forgotten. Minji did not know what to say. She felt tears beginning to form again. And this time, she did not try to stop them. The cubs will not be punished. Commander Hay-1 continued. I have read all the reports. And I have seen all the recordings. I have watched how they responded to your exhaustion. Their behavior was remarkable. They showed something that we do not often see among the Zelkani anymore. They showed kindness that was not based on strength or superiority. They showed care for another being, simply because that being was in need. What will happen to me? Minji asked quietly. You will continue your teaching, the commander said. But you will also rest. I am assigning you a room in the residential area, so that you do not have to make the long journey back to the human quarters every day. You will sleep. You will eat properly. You will take care of your physical body. 1. It is an important part of your work here, not a failure or a weakness. Minji looked at the large blue alien standing in front of her, and she realized that something was changing. Something in the way he looked at her. The way he was speaking to her. He was not treating her as a subject to be evaluated. He was treating her as a person. Thank you, she said simply. Do not thank me, Commander Hay-1 replied. Thank the cubs. They have taught both of us something important today. They have shown me that there is another way to be strong, a way that includes taking care of each other, a way that includes rest and kindness, along with achievement. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Sleep well, Dr. Minji. Tomorrow, the cubs will be eager to continue learning. And as he left, Minji realized that she was no longer just a representative of humanity being tested by an alien species. She had become part of something greater. She had become part of a bridge between two worlds, a bridge that might change everything. Commander Hay-1 returned to his office and made a decision that he knew would have consequences. On his screen, he could see the incident report that had been filed by one of the surveillance officers. It stated clearly and without any ambiguity that Dr. Minji, human, had failed to maintain consciousness during an assigned teaching duty. This was a violation of the standards for advanced educational staff. This was evidence of biological inadequacy. According to the protocols of the Zelkani Collective, this report needed to be forwarded immediately to the Council on the Zelkani Prime World. The Council would use this information, along with all other data about human behavior and capability, to make a final determination about whether humanity was worthy of acceptance as equals in the galactic community. Commander Hay-1 could see how the Council would interpret this information. They would say that humans were too fragile for advanced work. They would say that humanity had the minds of children, but the bodies of beings who could not even stay awake long enough to do their jobs. They would recommend that the cultural exchange program be terminated and that humanity be placed under observation for another 100 years until they had evolved further. This would be the logical conclusion based on the information presented. But there was another perspective, and Commander Hay-1 knew that the Zelkani people desperately needed this other perspective, even if they did not know it yet. He began to type out his own report, overwriting the surveillance officer's conclusion with his own interpretation of the events. He was allowed to do this. As the commander of Station Harmony, he had the authority to determine which reports were sent to the council and which were kept as local records. He had never used this authority before. He had always believed that transparency and honesty were the most important values. He had always followed the rules and protocols exactly as they were written, but now he understood that sometimes following the rules exactly could prevent a deeper truth from being told. His report was honest. He described exactly what had happened. The human teacher had fallen asleep due to biological need for rest. The young Zelkani students had responded by protecting her weakness rather than exploiting it or reporting it. They had continued the lesson independently, demonstrating intellectual capability and collaborative thinking. They had shown compassion. Commander Hay-1 wrote, The response of the cubs demonstrates that the Zelkani species is not simply a competitive, hierarchical civilization. Embedded within our DNA, within our cultural memory, there exists another way of being. There exists the capacity for cooperation, for mutual support, for the kind of strength that does not come from dominating others, but from lifting them up. The human presence on Station Harmony is not a test of whether humanity is worthy of joining our civilization. It is a mirror in which we can see what we have become and what we have lost. He sent the report through the encrypted channel to the Zelkani Prime world. As he did, he knew that he was risking his position, perhaps even his life. The Zelkani did not like it when their leaders questioned their fundamental values. The council might see his report as an act of defiance or even insanity, but it was the right thing to do. 3 days later, Commander Hay-1 received a message from the council. They requested his immediate presence at a hearing. They had questions about his report. They wanted to understand why he was suggesting that the Zelkani people had lost something important, when the historical record clearly showed that they had only grown stronger and more efficient, as they had eliminated emotional attachments and cultural traditions that were deemed inefficient. Commander Hay-1 had to leave Station Harmony and travel to the Zelkani Prime world, which took nearly 2 weeks in high-speed travel. He would miss the next several lessons with the cubs. Dr. Minji would have to continue teaching without him watching from the observation chamber. Before he left, he made a point to visit her one more time. He found her in the teaching chamber, preparing materials for the next lesson. She looked better than she had before. She was sleeping more now. The color had returned to her face. She looked like she was beginning to truly live, not just survive. "I am leaving Station Harmony for a while," he told her. "There are matters that require my attention at the Prime world." Minji looked up from her work, concern crossing her face. "Is this because of what happened? Because of the lesson where I fell asleep? Is the council making a decision about whether humanity is acceptable?" "It is related," Commander Hay-1 said. "But not in the way you might think. I have sent a report to the council. I have told them what I witnessed here. I have told them about the cubs and their response to your exhaustion. I have told them that humanity has something to teach us." "What will happen?" Minji asked. "I do not know," Commander Hay-1 said truthfully. "The council may decide that I am wrong. They may decide that I have been too influenced by human presence and human values. But I had to tell them the truth as I understand it. I had to give them the option to see what I have seen." He paused, and then he added something that was very difficult for a Zelkani to say. "Thank you, Dr. Minji. Thank you for coming to Station Harmony. Thank you for being tired and imperfect and human. You have helped me remember what it means to be more than just strong." Minji reached out and placed her hand on his crystalline arm. It was a gesture of comfort and gratitude. She did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. The gesture was enough. As Commander Hay-1 left the teaching chamber and made his way to the transport ship that would carry him to the Prime world, he thought about the future. He thought about what the council would decide. He thought about whether humanity and the Zelkani could truly find a way to exist together as equals, not as competitors, but as partners. He thought about the cubs and how they had shown him something precious. He thought about Minji and how her presence on Station Harmony had changed something fundamental in the way he understood what it meant to be alive. And he prepared himself for a conversation that might change the course of history. The Zelkani Council Chamber was a place of cold precision. The walls were made of smooth, white material that reflected light in a way that made it impossible to focus on any single point. The council members themselves sat in elevated positions, their scales glowing with colors that indicated their emotional state and their level of concentration. They were the oldest and most intelligent Zelkani in the civilization. They had guided the species for the past 3,000 years. Commander Hay-1 stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by their judgmental presence. He had traveled across the galaxy to be here, and he knew that his entire career, perhaps even his life, depended on the decision they made about his report. The council leader, whose name was Jae-sung, and who was so old that his scales had become nearly transparent, spoke first. Commander Haywan, he said, his voice slow and careful. You have submitted a report that contradicts 3,000 years of documented Zelkani philosophy. You suggest that we have lost something important. You suggest that a young, primitive species like humanity has something to teach us. This is a very serious claim. Knight. It is not a claim, Commander Haywan replied. It is an observation. It is documented fact. Multiple recordings support what I have stated. The recordings show a human who fell asleep during her duties, said another council member, named Misun. The recordings show young Zelkani, who failed to report her weakness. How do you interpret this as evidence of something we have lost, rather than evidence of biological inadequacy in both the human and the cubs? Commander Haywan took a deep breath. He had prepared for this conversation, but it was still difficult. Because, he said carefully, the cubs did not simply fail to report her. They actively protected her. They chose compassion over compliance with protocol. And in choosing compassion, they demonstrated higher-order thinking, not lower-order thinking. They chose to optimize for long-term relationships and mutual support rather than immediate advantages through exploitation of weakness. There was a long silence in the council chamber. The Zelkani were considering his words, and their scales changed colors as they thought. Haywan could see their bioluminescence shifting between cool blues and analytical greens. Finally, an older female council member named Hail spoke. I want to understand something, she said. In your interpretation, the cubs showed wisdom in protecting their teacher. But by what measure is protection wisdom? Strength is wisdom. Efficiency is wisdom. We eliminated emotional attachment 3,000 years ago, specifically because it made us less efficient, less powerful, less successful. That is true, Commander Haywan agreed. We did eliminate emotional attachment, and we became more efficient. We built a civilization that reached across the stars. We developed technology that allows us to live in perfect harmony with our environment. We created systems of organization so logical and precise that there is no poverty, no disease, no suffering caused by disorder or inefficiency. Then how can you suggest we have lost something? Jae-sung demanded. Because, Commander Haywan said, and his voice carried a weight of emotion that was unusual for a Zelkani. We have built a civilization where no one is truly happy. We have built a system where everyone succeeds according to the measures we have created, but no one actually feels fulfilled. We have families that are more like business partnerships. We have friendships that are nothing more than strategic alliances. We have a civilization that is perfect on the outside and empty on the inside. The council chamber erupted in colors. Some council members' scales flashed with red anger. Others showed purple and violet confusion and uncertainty. A few showed pale, yellow and light blue curiosity. Hail leaned forward. You are telling us that we should care more about happiness than about achievement? No, Commander Haywan said. I am telling you that humans care about both. They have built civilizations that are not as efficient as ours. And they do experience poverty and disease and suffering. But they also experience something that we have lost. They experience genuine connection with each other. They experience love. They experience meaning that comes not from achievement, but from the people they share their lives with. He pulled up the recordings on the display screen. Watch the cubs, he said. Watch how Kite looks at Dr. Minji when she wakes up. Watch how Seoyun shares her insights with the others, instead of keeping them for herself. Watch how Ara, the youngest, offers support to the others, even though she is the least experienced. This is not inefficiency. This is wisdom that we forgot we had. The council spent the next 3 days reviewing recordings and evidence. They read histories of human civilization, looking at how humans had progressed despite their biological limitations. They read poetry and music and stories, trying to understand what these strange cultural artifacts meant. And slowly, something began to change in the council chamber. On the 4th day, Hay-Il made an announcement. "We have made a decision," she said. "Commander Hay-1 is correct. There is something valuable in human presence that we need to study further. We propose that the cultural exchange program be expanded, not terminated. We propose that humans be invited to all our major educational institutions. We propose that humans and Zelkani young people study together, learn from each other. What about the question of human acceptance into the galactic community?" Another council member asked. "That question," Jae-sung said slowly, "is no longer about whether humans are advanced enough to be our equals. It is about whether we are wise enough to be their equals. It is about whether we can learn from them as much as they can learn from us." Commander Hay-1 felt something in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. It was relief, yes, but it was also something else. It was hope. It was the beginning of something new. As he prepared to return to Station Harmony, he realized that his report had created a ripple that would spread through the entire Zelkani civilization. Slowly, gradually, carefully. The Zelkani people would begin to remember what it meant to care for each other. They would begin to understand that strength and compassion were not opposites, but could exist together. It had all started with one tired human teacher and 6 young Zelkani who had chosen to help instead of harm. It had started with a moment of compassion in a teaching chamber on Station Harmony, and it would change everything.